No, but how'd you meet Jess?
Yeah, so I was at a point, I'd been a PT for 10 years and I was kind of just trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go. I had done neuro for my whole career, but I was thinking about getting back into sports and orthopedics. And I was like, what if I go back and get a master's in athletic training? And so I was exploring that possibility. And Jess was like so generous with her time and like got on Zoom with me and just basically like told me what it was like to be in the program, encouraged me to go for it. And then at the end, she was like, "Do you know what classification is? Like, have you ever heard of this? Because like your resume, like you like fit perfectly like as like a para ski snowboard classifier." And I'd heard of classification, obviously, but she explained more. And I guess they had a need for para snow sports classifiers at the time, and this was like 2021. And they had an international training course that was all like online. It was pretty intensive. And so I did that. And it was, yeah, all because of Jess. And she really like helped me do that and like spoke with, people to help me get it paid for too, the training and everything. And she's just such a amazing advocate and teacher. And I just think the world of her.
No, that's great, especially when you find people who are not just great mentors like at an individual level, but like also just really good at like educating.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Um, Reeling it back actually, so you started off in neuro. Maybe you could quickly describe like some of your background because I've seen some of like your content just as I was trying to get to know you a little bit, and it sounds like you have a background being an athlete and figure skating. What point was there a transition, and maybe you can speak to that background as an athlete into kind of more of the career you currently have more in physical therapy?
Yeah, boy. So where do I start? Yeah, I had somebody, I did a job interview once and they looked at my resume and they said your resume is eclectic. And I thought that was an interesting word because yeah, I kind of follow my heart a lot and just do, what makes sense to me, what I'm seeing like results from and just follow that. And so basically, I started out like most of us PTs as like I was an athlete and then I was injured. I was really fortunate that I had really good trainers. Like I had a trainer when I was 10 who ended up becoming the strength and conditioning coach for the Baltimore Orioles. And I remember he was working with some minor league players at the time. And I would be like 10 years old and working out next to these like, potentially MLB players. And that was just like always so fun and inspiring for me. And I think that kind of planted the seeds initially. And then figure skating was obviously the reason why I was training with him. And then just had really good coaches over the years that taught me how to like use my body and as a figure skater and ice dancers are very detail oriented and I think and my trainers were also very detail oriented and I think that served me as a PT.
Mhm.
Um, but basically, yeah, so I competed on the national level in ice dance with my partner. And I had a hip injury. We were doing a lift, or I was in a split, and we fell, and I kind of fell into a split position, tore my labrums and my hips, and had an FAI and all that stuff as well. Was lucky at the time, the only person that would do a arthroscopic labral repair was in Colorado in Vail. And so my parents, we were living in Boston, like were amazing enough and sent me out there. And I saw like really good quality PT happen there. And I was getting PT for 3 hours a day after surgery and just had an amazing outcome. And all the PTs looked like they were having a lot of fun. Like they were like living in this mountain town. They all like got along. And I just enjoyed being there. And so when it came time to think about like what do I want to do with my career, obviously like I want to be a PT or an athletic trainer was kind of where I went with that. But then the person that rehabbed me back in Boston also was an Olympic ice dancer, and his wife was a professional ballerina, retired, and she w taught my partner and I ballet. And one day we came in and she had all this weird equipment. And she was like, "We're not doing ballet today, we're doing gyrotonic." And she had just gotten certified in gyrotonic. And it was the first time I had like really felt like good in my body and like really like all those details. People weren't just like, do that better. They were actually like, here's how you do better. And I'm like, really, I care about the details. And so I rehabbed with her husband. And then that gyrotonic also became part of my rehab process when I got home from Colorado.
Mhm.
Um, and then kind of as my skating career ended, then I went to PT school and I worked in his clinic as an aide and I taught gyrotonic, became certified. And that was kind of, I guess, like the brief story of kind of my journey to
Well, I'd like to unpack a little bit more kind of on the
oh, the
athlete side
neuro.
before we keep going. Mainly around like, did you start figure skating and ice dancing when you were young? And is that typical that you pick it up? And like, how'd you get into that? Was it like you were doing gymnastics beforehand? Did you have like a pretty broad exposure to different sports growing up? Like, how'd you hone in on that and fall in love with that?
I did a lot of everything. I was one of those kids just needed to move or else my parents couldn't handle me. And so I was signed up for everything. And we had an ice rink down the street. And I really wanted to play hockey, actually. And my parents were like, you should learn how to skate first. And then I really just loved like the freedom and the feeling of like you're flying, just like wind in your face. And I like it was just really fun. And so then my coach was like, well, you should think about lessons. And then once that happens, it's then you start, competing. And then we moved actually to Boston, where that was like a major training center for like the top skaters in the country at the time. We didn't move for skating, we moved for my dad's job, but I was lucky that I then had access to more coaches and my partner, we were just friends and he was shorter than me and we would just like have a lot of fun together. And then my friend was like, you guys should skate together. So we did it as like a joke and then he grew and then we just had all this success. And yeah, I just feel like, I was really fortunate to be
Yeah.
in that situation. But yeah, but it was always
Yeah.
fun, My parents
What's cool
do it.
I'm sure you could like overanalyze a lot, right? Like things organically occur. I think as opportunities come, like as you're an athlete going through the process and you look back and it's easier to say like, oh, some of it was deliberate, some of it wasn't. You also said you had some really good coaches. I'd be curious to hear like what in your eyes made them really good coach, whether it's like you liking details. It sounds like they could just help direct your attention and or focus and or intention really well. So if you could talk to like what those good coaches maybe did, just in case people are listening and like are coaches themselves, like where we can
Yeah.
take and apply some of those same principles, would be really cool to hear.
Yeah. I think a lot about this. So like good coaches, I think, love what they do. And I think that's infectious and it makes you want to be around them. And I
Mhm.
think that's for me, like the thing that always drew me to different coaches. I think a coach can um understand different learning styles and modify to their athlete versus just teaching one way and forcing the athlete to have to modify. I think identifying those things is important to be able to do as a coach. And then I think to be open-minded. So to like kind of like have that end goal in mind, being really invested in it and just connected to the athlete, and then being malleable and how you get to that end
Mhm.
point and that outcome, and making it fun along the way, to make you want to keep doing it. And yeah. And the relationship, really, I think the relationship is super
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, I think that's all. I would agree with a lot of those just from my own like lived experience in sport too. It sounds like, good coaches too, like also connect dots, I think, like help bridge the why. And like some of that sounds like, it
Yes.
sounds like you're cross training, you had a diverse sport background, even though you were maybe focused at a time on the ice and what you were doing there. But like, yeah, you maybe need to learn things dry land with ballet, right? And that's an aspect of training, but it's also kind of like its own side, like exploratory side quest to the main quest, if you want to
So
use this quest type analogy that's quite common these days. But having coaches and or coaches connect you with other coaches that, center it back to why you're doing what you're doing and how it's going to ultimately tie back into like your problem solving ability on the ice or your skill like learning and adaptation, which I think is really cool. But to keep going, so you got into sort of as you ended your athletic career, you got into neuro, and that's where you started.
yeah, so I thought for sure that I was going to become this like orthopedic therapist, even up until my last clinical rotation. And then in my last clinical rotation, I wanted to go out west. So I found this place in Utah and encouraged my school to set up a contract with them. And they were nonprofit. And they work with people with spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, paralysis, and their whole model, I was really excited about more than the population at the time, was that they would see people as long as they needed to get them better. And the fact that like somebody with a spinal cord injury gets the same insurance benefit as somebody who has a broken leg, and the person with the spinal cord injury really needs a lot more care than that. And so maybe the reason why people aren't progressing and we think that people can't have neurologic recovery is not so much of a physiological problem as it is a system problem. And so it was started by a physician who had a spinal cord injury himself and his PT basically, and he paid for all this extra care. And then people would say, "Oh, how come you are doing so great?" And he was kind of like embarrassed that he could had the opportunity to. Well, he's like, "Well, I paid for it because I have the resources," and so um, that's kind of how the nonprofit came about. So I was just really inspired by their whole mission and got my clinical rotation there. And at midterm, I had no doubts in my mind that that's where I wanted to work. If I had a choice, like I wanted to work there when I graduated more than anywhere. And so at midterm, I asked them for a job. They hadn't hired a PT in 9 years, and they had regular students come through there. And I was really lucky and they hired me. And then I stayed there for 5 years and I just felt such a sense of purpose. Like I was really making a difference in people's lives. I remember there being a kid who had a snowboard accident, I guess like well, a guy, he's older, like in his 30s maybe. And he had two young kids and im throughout my clinical, he improved, and we got to the point where he was jump roping, and I was teaching him how to jump rope, and he was getting it, and then his daughter walked in. She's like, "Wow, Dad, um, can you teach me how to do that too?" And he was like, "Yeah, I can." And I was just like, "Oh," like, and there's just so many moments like that where it was just so fulfilling, and so but I burned out really quick because I threw myself into it like 100%. And my mom actually passed away like a year or a couple of months after I graduated PT school and started that job. So as a coping strategy, just worked, and it was really fulfilling and it helped me heal too. But I kind of had to take a step back and shift, and I kind of moved back east and then started to work in different neuro settings. I'm just going to keep telling my story. Feel free to interrupt me. I don't know if I'm answering your questions, but and then I moved back to Boston and worked in acute rehab PT for spinal cord injury and brain injury, which was really cool after working with people on an outpatient basis for 5 years. And did that per diem, did a bunch of side jobs, worked a little bit of home care, home health, and then I started to get interested in orthopedics. I was like, that's why I became a PT to begin with, was orthopedics and sports. And so that kind of started me on this whole journey into shifting out of neuro and into orthopedics and did a residency program after being a PT for 10 years. And yeah, so
Before we get into like maybe more of the orthopedic side, like what were some of the things like from when you left school to like actually going into like the applied setting? What were some of those like initial challenges of like this doesn't quite line up with the experience I've had? If you experience that, or where you're like these were some techniques or things that based on all my learning and experience prior seem to work really well with some of this, population that maybe most people don't always work with. And a good example of that might be for me, like when I started working with adaptive populations, which my current role is the first time I've done that. I for about the last 2 years have had to recalibrate what, my so-called motor and or movement bandwidths are because it's going to look so different. And then not that we can't have a sort of distinct end goal, but that's going to look so different than if I'm working with, let's say, a healthy, able-bodied population, right? Where a lot of my mentors, even though they intended well, had much more of like this technical and or linear pedagogy as to you do A, then you progress. It's much more like linear as far as progression and regression goes, when there's a lot more non-linearity when you're dealing with, you know, humans as complex systems, especially those that maybe have varying levels of impairment congenitally or due to trauma. So love to hear if there's
yeah.
learnings from that transition that you might be able to share.
Yeah, I mean, that was really interesting because so my mentor who was a co-founder of the place I worked, NeuroWorks, she was also my clinical instructor and she would always say like everybody's an N with any sort of neurological impairment is an N of one. Being like in a research study, like they're never going to be able to do a really good research study because everyone's so individual and so unique and so different. And that's, I think, what makes it so fun is that there can't be like a certain protocol that you follow to a T that's always going to work the way it is sometimes with a able-bodied athlete or patient. And I think what I'm guessing kind of like what made me stand out as somebody that they would hire for that job was the creativity that I brought to it, coming from the movement background I had as a gyrotonic teacher and as a kind of like an artistic athlete, I guess, right? As a figure skater. Um, and I always I would say to myself, like, if my patient is bored, then like, or if I'm bored, then my patient's probably bored too. And if they're bored, their nervous system isn't lit up and it's not like gonna make change, and neuroplasticity isn't gonna be like happening as actively. And so I would just like come up with things and be like, well, let's try this. Seems safe enough. Like I had all the resources in the world, all the time in the world, like all the aids in the world. And so I think, yeah, my background as an athlete and also just knowing my own body. Like I'm a very kinesthetic learner myself. And so I think having the movement background, I could feel things and be like, okay, like what would this feel like in somebody's body who has spasticity? And then just trying different things and learning from my experience of my own self, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's funny you bring that up because as you mentioned the word creativity, that's I would say one of my strong suits with
Yeah.
with
This, from
population
what I've
work.
seen, yeah, I love your stuff. So cool.
Um, I would also say just to like parallel some of my own experience, I think with yours, which is interesting. It's great to hear this because I don't get to connect so often with people that have had experience, even though it may not be your current like major focus, but have had experience with adaptive populations. Since I'm still trying to learn a lot about them, is not just the creative side, but like leaning much more into like the ecological dynamics and like constraint-led approach, just to like help empower those athletes to explore positions or recruit things that they maybe haven't, just because we can see we know our environments, the tools we have in it. I'm a very avid, artistic mover myself based on my sporting background. So very similar to you, like I can feel and anticipate like this is probably how we can position you or get you set up, and then you'll naturally self-organize and perform the movement, solve it your own way. Um, and just before we keep unpacking some of your career, you've mentioned Gyrotonic just a couple times. Maybe you could just quickly either operationally or just describe what that is, just so if people are unfamiliar.
Yeah, so gyrotonic a lot of times gets grouped in the like that's the thing that's like Pilates category because a lot of Pilates teachers also teach it, but it's very different. Like Pilates came from, with my understanding, from like a rehab approach. Like that's how it was invented, is like a rehabilitative sort of exercise. Whereas gyrotonic was kind of founded by a guy who did a lot of yoga and was an artist himself, was a dancer and gymnast. And basically had like a Kundalini experience if you know yoga, and his spine started to move in certain ways, and he felt like, wow, this was groundbreaking for me. It recentered my body. And how could I like, and then he came back to earth basically and it said, how can I make this accessible for other people so they don't have to go through this whole deep meditative yoga process? And his brother is also a physical therapist. And so then he, I think, also assisted in making it more like understandable for the population. And then he built all this equipment based on like what was his end, like his like what is the goal? Like his goal is to get somebody to move some certain way. So he would just try things and he had this workshop and whatever. And so a lot of dancers, it started kind of like really exploded in New York City among the dancer population and has kind of like trickled over into the rehab world a little bit, like on the coast mostly. Like there's some PTs that do gyrotonic. The Boston Ballet, I know, has a gyrotonic tower in their PT room. And so it definitely has like a rehabilitative use. But what makes it different than Pilates is it's more weight-based versus spring-based. It's a little less compressive. And you have all the principles of like Chinese medicine and in with that, like the energetic balance and the breathing and the spine movement. And so it can be really restorative. And I really feel like it helps me to help people move more efficiently. I still need the load, I still need the strength training stuff, but it's just a tool in my toolbox, basically. So
No, that's really cool. And I like how you keep, this is my own personal preference, kind of bias towards movement, but like how you keep infusing like the artistic component, but it's really grounded too by, I think, a lot of like very focused, deliberate manipulation as well. Like it's not just always artistic tools and brushes that you're constantly stroking and employing. And I think you have, it seems, a really good balance of getting results through stuff that works, as well as like sound medical practice and or like the experiences you've had from gyrotonic to, I mean, and we'll get into your orthopedic sort of side in a minute here. but blended with that like very authentic athletic artist side as well, which
I
I think
think
is
it's
really
like knowing your why, like you said, like keeping the whole purpose in mind. Like we're not just teaching people gyrotonic so they can become good at gyrotonic. It's
cool.
like figuring out what tools you need to use to get to your goal. And I think a lot of the times, like I never just set out to try to be creative with anything. Like I was like, I'm going to be a creative therapist. It kind of always just happened because I was like, okay, that person needs to be able to do that and that's not working, so let's try this instead. And then eventually you have this exercise and people are like, wow, you're such a creative practitioner, and you're like, I am, but it's really like you were just always had my eyes on my why. At least that's how it's happened for me. So
Yeah, it's still somewhat goal directed.
yeah.
Yeah. So sorry for the little pivot there, but so after a lot of like your neuro experience and you started to change course a little bit, maybe continue to walk us around your career and as you kind of got more into orthopedics.
Oh yeah. So still love neuro to this day, but kind of like so I went back east, did all this exploration, decided I want to kind of make a shift to orthopedics after I tore my ACL, and was seeing different therapists work, and I was like, this is really interesting to me. Went to combined sections meeting for the APTA and found myself drawn to all the ortho sports stuff. And then consider going to athletic training school for a short time. That's where I met Jess, and she got me into classification. And then my friend Kara Baxter, who um, worked with the ski team, she was opening a clinic and I knew her husband was an athletic trainer. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, like, I want to do some observation. Can I observe Dave? And she said, yeah, sure. And then started to talk to me about how they were starting an orthopedic residency. And I like was interested in having being the first resident. And so I thought that would be a really good opportunity. I knew kind of going in that I would struggle to work in a traditional insurance-based setting, seeing people for like 40 minutes at a time and like a whole bunch of patients a day. But I figured I could do it for a year and a half. And I learned a ton and went through Evidence in Motion. So it was online based program. And then there were some in-person intensives. And then you had a mentor at your clinic that you're working in. And it definitely put me outside of my comfort zone. And, being like a decade into my career and then feeling like I'm a beginner again. And it was interesting to then have to go from this like less scientific approach that I was taking, where like, oh, everyone's an N of one. I don't really like no research really matters that much. Like I'm aware of some of it, but um and I can see outcomes and people are getting better. So like, it doesn't matter too much to then like this world of orthopedics where there's all these clinical prediction rules that are in place and all these really specific science-based things that I had to fill myself in on. And it was a little frustrating at times, but I'm really glad I did it. And I feel like I now have a better um, balance of like the science and the artistic side, and can decide which way I want to go with a little bit more evidence-based approach. So.
That's awesome. I'd love for you to maybe share how you like have audited yourself and or like updated your models. Because I feel like that's something I'm going through right now, where like 2 years working with my teams going into my third, I've I've created a cultural shift and have had to learn and beyond rapport and trust, but like had to learn a lot of like those individualized needs and how I like not just use constraints, but like still primarily get goal-directed behavior and help athletes have like a task in mind that they achieve. But now I'm starting to get to the point of that's still important, but there is kind of, I feel, right, and as I unpack more with like return to play type processes, like how you actually get back to if we're rehabbing an adaptive athlete, movement is or like basically your what's deemed your normal movement patterning is like actually pretty important and it can't just be entirely task. Like there are some sensory motor competencies that we need to achieve and still identifying those with that N of one is where like okay I still need to lean a little bit into the science and I'm currently drawing a lot, from sports medicine since it's a little bit beyond my scope, but super important for the athletes I work with. So if you could talk to me about how you maybe went about that like model update process, I think that would be really cool since that's something that I feel like I'm going through. and by all means share as much as you want. And I'm sure you maybe can't unpack everything since it's probably something that just isn't organically unfolded with your own challenge
Yeah.
and whatnot. But a quick side note, Dave was my desk mate for the last year and a half, and unfortunately just shifted one desk over and is no longer. But Dave is
Uh,
awesome.
I learned so much from him. He's great.
Yeah.
Um, so how did I shift from like uh more like patient-based, I guess, approach to the looking at all the science and combining that together? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yep. And what that like I'm calling it a model update,
Yeah.
how you went about that update process.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit different because I was also switching the population that I was working with, um, going from the neuro patient to the orthopedic patient. And so I think that it was just a whole different, um, I guess, mindset of how I approach somebody with. And I think still though, like I guess if I were to go back to neuro, I guess would be probably the better way to think about it. If I were to go back to working with a neuro population, um, or adaptive population, I now would probably have more, I would still use their baseline as their baseline, like a function, because there's some adaptive athletes and patients that, like somebody with cerebral palsy, for example, like you're not gonna if they're in their 30s or 40s and they've been walking a certain way, you're not gonna like stretch out their adductors and change the way they walk in the like 1 hour, 2 hours you spend with them like once a week. And that might not even be that helpful for them. It might take away some of their function and their abilities to adapt or perform the way that they are used to. Um, but what I might do a little differently is like actually focus on strength more. I think I was treating the neuro impairment so much, um, and trying to deal with spasticity so much and balance so much and the like principles of neuroplasticity that I think sometimes I probably didn't do enough. Just there's still a human body with, muscle tissue and just those basic strength training principles. I think I could have probably integrated better, at that time. Um, I don't think I would actually use all of the able-bodied like research. I think I would consider it, but I don't know necessarily if I would always apply it the way I do with the orthopedic population. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no, I think it just shed some light on your insight and experience, which is great. I mean, to add to it, like to your point, like applying. So my role, strength conditioning coach, we use the title athletic development. I'm at
yeah.
our organization. I do apply S&C principles. And I've explored things that, are well studied in able-bodied populations across all sports, things like load velocity profiles and such. And so I thought, well, it'd be good to have an idea of like how, let's say, a sit skier, right? Someone with limited and or no hip function, right? They can use their
Hmm.
own body. Maybe what a bench press, looks like for them. Because I was on the floor coaching and, a little time goes by and I realized, wow, like even when I cue for speed or power and I'm trying different sort of extrinsic cues or external cues, like there seems to be a rate limiter is like they can't move fast or as fast as I might expect, right? And
Yeah.
so I thought, okay, well let's do a little bit, science and let's throw
That
on
would
a
be so interesting to me. Like,
linear transducer. And essentially,
yeah.
I'm trying to confirm something that I'm observing, but I needed something objective to back it up. And I thought, okay, with a free weight barbell, right, these sit skiers can actually move loads the fastest. Basically fastest for them, but still fast for them is 0.6-ish, zero point 0.7 maybe meters per second. Fast for an able-bodied, someone who can use leg drive and all this other stuff, um, well over 1 meter per second, right? Even with just the bar, a very light load. Now, we could move really slow, but there's zones as far as like what might be considered strength and speed or speed strength or power are very drastically different. And I had noticed that it wasn't just set to those that maybe had something congenital, as far as like spina bifida, but it was also present with those that, played sports as an able-bodied and had trauma and were maybe a bilateral above knee later in life. And it was
Mhm.
interesting as to, well, why is this? And is it entirely just because they don't have, leg drive or they can't irradiate tension through their whole body? And part of it is like, I don't really know, but at least I have some sort of objective measurement to know that what is fast and or power for these athletes is going to look and the tooling to use is different. than what able-bodied or typical research and literature is. And that's just one example of many things that I've sort of used somewhat technology to help critically think about what I'm observing in coaching and how I select exercises and or manipulate constraints based on what I'm trying, stimulus I'm trying to achieve, but or
Yeah,
adaptation.
that's super interesting. Like the effects of spasticity with velocity too are really interesting and how that translates into sport and how somebody might, even as a classifier, present on the slope if they're moving really fast, it can be way different in the evaluation room. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think
But
that's so interesting.
to your point though of, you know, as you were talking and saying like, okay, if you have going to your example of the 30-year-old with CP, right? We may not change there's better bang for a buck if we, address strength, right? Something that's principle based as opposed to let's try and totally change your or manipulate your gait pattern. One thing that I've asked myself the question I don't have a good answer to is like, okay, for athletes that are congenital or going to the speed example I'm using with velocity based training is like, I'm getting a lot of my adaptive athletes are much older than at the elite level, spanning 18 years to 50 years, which is just a much broader range than typical elite teams. Is how much influence do I have over your conduction velocity, or like creating, new neural pathways and things like that. It's like I'm still going to throw things at you because it's important, I think, to be challenged. But
Hmm.
from an adaptation, whether that's structure, neurological, et cetera, how much am I really influencing that? And are there more meat and potatoes we should be addressing elsewhere? So how much time do I spend on that? And that will be to the end of one with their goals and maybe age and other parameters, sort of where they're at will dictate that.
Because you're
But
basically writing the playbook, you know, for each person individually. Because there's
yeah,
not anything out there really that's for specific to adaptive athletes that are just like the ones that you're working with.
yeah. But as I feel like being embedded in the system, I'm also like asking these questions where it's like, I guess I will never know, but I also want to be careful is that if I am so-called, writing a playbook for the winter sport adaptive athlete, that
Yeah.
there are major gaps or other things that can't, and obviously you can always backstep and say, well, this is a gap and we need to go back and fill it, but there isn't
Right.
anything major that I'm missing right away.
And then like what are the most important things to know even, right? Like you could study anything.
Yeah.
Like what's going to give you the most
Yeah. But I
result.
guess it is a good transition as well to like you've alluded to connecting with Jess and your time at Motion. Um, you've become a power classifier, right? So you help classify different types of impairments for elite adaptive competition. Is that just winter sport? Is that just para-alpine skiing? What kind of classification is that entirely focused on?
Yeah, so I'm the international classifier for para alpine ski and then para snowboard.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about some of these things of like gait patterns and whatnot, like how often, I guess, do you run into, rule changes or even just as you're doing assessing individuals and you still have to classify them to so-called buckets, there's, I imagine, some pretty drastic differences even with athletes that end up getting bucketed into the same classification. What
Yeah.
does it look like, especially when, you hold a level of authority when it comes to a world stage of competition for these athletes?
Yeah. It is a lot of responsibility. Like I definitely take that seriously because these athletes are real athletes. Like I think, the layperson doesn't really sometimes understand that a Paralympian isn't just, it's competitive to even become a Paralympian of any kind. And we do get protests sometimes, and that's so we sit on a panel with one other either physiotherapist or a physician, and they usually try to have one person that has more experience and has been doing it a lot longer, and one person that maybe isn't. I'm a little bit newer. It's been a few years now that I've been classifying. And they usually try to have like one physician and one physical therapist. And yeah, sometimes the people are waiting out there in the hallway for a while because even though the rule book is like very detailed, there's a lot of nuance, and we're trying to make the best decision that we can make for the athlete and understanding also that like things are going to be different on the slopes and that's why we go out and we observe as well in competition. And then we sit together and we say, okay, like, are we all okay with this decision? And Really like weigh the pros and cons. We look at video footage together. It really we really do work to make it as objective as we possibly can. And I know that FIS is always trying to make things better. Every single season, they're making changes to the rules or considering like situations that have happened in past seasons that people had questions about or want to talk about more among the classifiers. And so it's really it's I find it really stimulating also, like those questions of like, can we compare this athlete to this athlete? Like, how are they competing in the same class? Like, that's what the rule book says. So we're like always questioning the rule book. And I think I'm sure as an athlete, that's a really intimidating process to go through to, be right before you compete to have to go have a full physical assessment. I mean, that's pretty, I don't know, I would be nervous. So we
Yeah.
try to make it as comfortable for them as possible, but
Well, especially when para-alpine has a factor, right, applied, in which case, yeah, if your classification changes, it could either work in your favor or against you, or be neutral. You stay the same, but most
yeah.
people hope for something, a better factor.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it can be. I am curious, like not to go into like all the moral and ethical side of like classification, like as you're alluding to, of like how do you compare someone like against someone like sport, there's I think this overarching argument of like sport, especially amateurism, like is to hopefully find and identify like who are the best athletes. And whether it's adaptive or able-bodied sport, take your, NBA league or sprinters or even just high school athletes, like the point is someone is trying to be superior than someone else. Now, hopefully that's done through like honest and fair like sportsmanship, right? That people aren't doping or things like that, but people's physiology is going to be different. Whether, they're more prepared from training standpoint, they're more skilled, some combination thereof. Um, how do some of like the ethical conversations as you've been a part of, being a classifier, what kind of conversations do come up and maybe like things that you've addressed or things that are just tough to address that could continue to be like a circular challenge.
Yeah. So I feel like I've been pretty lucky that I've had the opportunity to sit on a couple panels with the head of classification. And she, in competition, sometimes she'll say things like, I'll be like, whoa, how is that athlete like in whatever class? And she'll be like, because of her history, she'll be like, they weren't that good before. Like they've just trained really hard. Like, and she has like that historical background of like, and also having watched the sport for so many years, she has the ability to really, and Jess is also this way, to decipher between like that's skill and that's like impairment. Like when you get under the snow, because it is easy for a new classifier to look at somebody who may be doing really well in competition and think, oh, they're lying in the classification room about how impaired they are, to try to get into a different class. But there's a lot of senior people in the classification world internationally. I can't really speak to the national level, but that really keep the whole process in check that I'm constantly learning from.
Mhm.
That, what was
Yeah, no,
that your question? I can think I could go off a tangent,
yeah,
but
no, I think it touches on it, mainly because I'm just thinking of examples. Feel like I read something in the last whatever 3 4 years, and I've taken some courses mainly around like LGBTQ athletes as well, like doping and or just like differences in testosterone levels with female sprinters, right? I think there was a female sprinter in the last couple of years. But gonna butcher her name, so I won't even say it. I forget, but where she just naturally had higher testosterone, right? So like the question is like she shouldn't race with um like female sprinters, right? Or like, is that fair or is it not? It's like, well, if natural physiological levels are like that, like, and she's skilled, I think that's cool that you're able to, through experience, and I think a lot of coaches and or practitioners probably over time can develop a similar eye and experience to assess, but like, what is skill from impairment and or if someone were trying to, um, yeah, trying to work the system, you'd be
yeah.
able to tell,
So have you heard of classification doping?
no, tell me more.
Classification doping is the idea that a physician or somebody on the team might inject an athlete with something to make their spasticity appear higher, to make them look worse in the room. And then that wears off, and when they go to competition, they can compete and do well. And I don't think this is hopefully super prevalent. at the moment, but it is something that's happening, unfortunately,
Mhm.
that we have an eye out for. Another thing also that in the past I've seen as like a issue or a conflict kind of that we've disputed is like MS, people with like muscular sclerosis or other conditions where they present way differently throughout the day, or their fatigue levels really impacts how they might perform in the evaluation in the classification room. And like, do we need to be better about like scheduling them at different times to make sure that it's fair, or, you know, so that kind of thing can be tricky, but
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
So I think I've seen a little bit, not to totally shift gears since it's still along like alpine skiing and whatnot. It looks like you ski and or mountain bike and do some mountain sports now as you've headed west. Were you always a winter sport athlete beyond just sort of the ice arena? Or
Yeah, I have ski raced in high school.
you did?
Um, yeah, in New Hampshire. It was like my parents didn't ski, and skiing was always like my fun thing. And my high school had a team, and I joined it. And just so happened that our practices were like on days, and I didn't skate, and so my coaches didn't really need to know about it too much. And so yeah, I did that. And then obviously living in Utah, it's like I ski as much as I possibly can. And I have so many more new hobbies since I moved to Utah like 12 years ago. Like mountain biking and just like climbing and
Probably
So-
good and bad, I guess, with equipment.
and then I'm like, oh well, my patients like do this, so I need to learn it so I can like be a better therapist. It's like how I justify it.
Well, so that's kind of where I guess where this question was going to go. You're one step ahead of yours. Do you feel like, and you seem like the kind of person that just likes to be active, like generally loves movement of all kinds, which I think is awesome. And I'm not saying like coaches have to or practitioners need to do what their patients do, their athletes do. I think it does help if even if it's not at a high level that you're doing something, even if it's artistic, like playing an instrument that demonstrates to someone, right, that you're working with that like you're applying similar principles on yourself or exploring it. Do you feel though that like having a background in skiing and just other outdoor sports now, plus being having been a high level athlete yourself, allows you to connect at like different levels with some of the patients that you've seen that had you not had those experiences, you think it might be different?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, skiing has always been like my favorite sport, even though I was a competitive figure skater. And I'm like a gear junkie and a total nerd when it comes to the details of skiing. And so in that case, like absolutely, like it helps to um, connect with living in Park City. Like almost everybody skis or snowboards. And also as a classifier, it's helpful. There's actually some classifiers that don't really ski that much themselves. And so when it comes to the observation side, being on the hill, like to actually understand like edge quality and what's actually happening with the mechanics. And also because I'm a kinesthetic learner. Like that's the reason why I'm like, I need to go learn this. So it's not just so it seems like I do the thing they do. It's really genuinely so I can understand it better. Because I won't understand it better like reading about it. I need to physically feel it. So
Yeah. I mean, as far as learning goes too, whether it is skiing or the other outdoor sport or even just like something more like a new theory or model, right, that you want to integrate into your practice, is there something that you're currently taking what's useful, discarding what's not, and trying to like integrate it and or add something that's uniquely your own? Like, are you currently going through something right now, or like in the last year, like having finished up maybe some continuing education or exposure to a novel idea? If so, I don't know if you can shed some light on
yeah.
it. It's like,
Um, well, I am always trying to, this has been like a career long thing for me, is trying to understand gyrotonic better, be able to articulate it better, like why it works, why people feel better with it in a scientific way. And also to like decide like the when and the how of like when I do. Like I feel like I have so many tools right now, and I feel like I'm still refining how I sequence them, who I use them with. I currently have a physical therapy student with me right now who is also a gyrotonic trainer. She actually came to me because she wanted to have a clinical rotation where she saw how I use that because it's kind of a unique thing. And it's been a fun process to like talk to her about like, okay, why did you do it with that person but not with that person? Like, and so I've done so much continuing ed in the past several years, and that I'm kind of at a stage in my career where for like a little bit, I'm just gonna I'm kind of stopping working on my business, working on using the tools I currently have fully, equipping myself with them if I know how to use them but don't have access to them, like that's a problem. So I'm trying to just kind of get everything together and utilize it fully. It's kind of where I'm at, to be
Yeah.
honest. But
No, that's really cool. I
uh,
feel like I have had ebbs and flows of that. Not that I've had as long of, career yet as you, but yeah, where finding like spending time actually applying, then maybe learning something new, then apply, then learn new is kind of evolution, this cyclical type thing that happens right over the career. That's yeah. The business side, how's that been? Is this something you've always wanted to do, or as you've kind of moved out here and seen opportunities, it's something that you kind of just picked up? Was it something that, yeah, that was always at the
um,
back? How's
I,
how's the process been as far as entrepreneurship
yeah.
goes?
I've like always been kind of interested in it, but I don't own my own business because I want to be a business owner. I own my own business because I realize how weird I am and how I can't work in a traditional system, I think really. I like to be able to have the freedom of like the time and the be able to do things the way that I want to do them and not have to answer to insurance companies and yeah, just having that flexibility is really what it's about for me. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to grow yet. I wouldn't hire people, just hire them. They need to like truly align with my values of, individualized, really patient-centered kind of care. So
With your current structure and maybe like number of people you currently see or work with, like, do you feel like it allows you again to like, and maybe you set it up this way, but to authentically like serve the people you work with better as well? Like
yes.
earlier you alluded to like that, those 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 kind of like 40-minute sessions all boom, boom, boom all day. As opposed to maybe now, maybe you see three patients, right? And you can spend anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes where it's much more, I don't want to say loose, but yeah, just patient-centered.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like I was kind of like I used to think that there's a problem with me because I can't like, a good job applicant can work in a fast-paced environment and, keep up with a million things at the same time. And I always felt that like I was deficient in that area. And I just realized that I think after residency, like to kind of embrace my like slower, more deliberate style. Actually, I was an even better therapist that way for my patients. And I felt like I was less burnt out and I was just more like genuinely like myself as a therapist and I could use my tools better. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of why have my own practice essentially. So I can do things at my own speed.
Yeah. No, that's cool. It's a way that I'm starting to lean. I've a little bit of background on me, so I spent quite a bit
Yeah,
of
I
time.
want to hear about you too.
I spent quite a bit of time actually in more of the collegiate side, going through like mentorships and internships, and probably spent a little bit too long. And I had really great mentors, really great peers, but long story short, it wasn't an environment that I knew I wanted to be in long term. It was just very toxic, both from like the coaching hierarchy to the sense of urgency. Like I was adapting myself or modifying who I was to fit it, and it was eating me a little bit. And I fortunately found myself in my current role, which is much more authentic and allows me to express myself. And I think part of that was opportunistic with para-alpine and para-snowboard coming back under our organization. So there was a lot of like opportunity for novelty there within our organization as far as like what the system looks like, structure around these teams. Um, but I always kind of felt similar to you. Like I work really well with myself and like how I like to do things. And sort of in parallel over the last year, I've been building out kind of my own business too. Nothing scalable or large yet, but that I'm setting or lining things up rather, to have that sort of on the side, so when I'm ready, I can kind of
Yeah,
step back and fully commit to that.
cool. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think similar to you, a lot of parallels in our stories in our own ways. I think um, I've always been like found value in like my sense of urgency and ability to deliver, but that when I slow down, not that my output is worse or lesser than, but like it's much more sustainable because I'm like a very high energy, a very passionate coach.
Mhm.
I keep having people tell me like you're gonna burn out. I'm like, no, I'm young, I'm great. But this past year has actually been a tough year. You probably can't tell, but I just had shoulder surgery, and so this one I'm 4 weeks out. But this last month of I had labrum and biceps tenodesis, but this last month has actually been like my recalibration reset a little bit of how can I maintain output but like have less of this urgency and like finding my own validation or having to turn up to everything and be constantly present. And so that's just all like personal professional growth I think that I'm learning along the way, but
And it's
echoes.
so hard when you're around high achievers all the time, right? Like,
It is,
and
yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
but
my brother was an elite gymnast, so I've always been surrounded by it. So there's also some parallels just as far as like the artistic gymnastics with maybe some figure skating and dance elements that
what
um,
collegiate sports did you work with?
a lot of men's and women's ice hockey. So I did my undergrad at University of Minnesota, and so I worked exclusively with Cal Dietz there. I did get exposure to like basketball and football there, but then I spent some time at University of Denver, where again I worked quite heavily with men's ice hockey. I worked with men's basketball there, and a lot all these places I worked with like a lot of teams, but I'm just kind of honing on what was my focal point. In the collegiate setting, I had a lot of exposure to basketball, volleyball, and ice hockey predominantly. Yeah, but I got exposure to field sports and other court sports and things like that as
What
well.
was your sport?
My sport, so growing up, I played. So I was not a collegiate athlete, but I played everything under the sun. A lot of ball sports. So I played soccer, basketball mainly as my team sports, and then I was also a board sport athlete. So did some ski racing, taught myself to snowboard, and I actually competed in snowboarding, not because I wanted to compete, but I want to get away from like a lot of the structured team sport competitive elements like in high school. And so to kind of complement it during the winter, like my plan B was, well, if I'm going to snowboard anyway, I might as well try and compete. But it was my like my creative outlet for, physical activity. But I'm also a musician, so I play quite a bit of guitar as well. So
Oh,
yeah, those. So I would now say that like basketball and snowboarding and anything else for just outdoor like recreation, action, adventure, kind of my current athletic endeavors. But
yeah. How fun though to get to work with para
yeah,
snowboard. Yeah.
yeah,
You ski
they're
work with ski too, right? Ski and snowboard.
yep. But they let me ride
Alpine.
sideways.
What?
Yeah, the alpine skiers let me ride sideways with them. They don't mind.
Oh, nice. That's kind of
Especially the sit skiers that call themselves one plankers too. So
yeah. You don't do Nordic though.
no, no, though there is rumor of them, or possibility, not rumor, possibility of them joining us after this game cycle. So.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
But whether I take them on or what that looks like is to be determined.
Totally different kind of athlete.
Yeah, yeah, it's a much more physiological entry to your sport. The skill element is something I'd like to learn though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything coming up that you have that you're really excited about, whether it's personal, business related, stuff you're exploring and would encourage others to look into?
Um, yeah, I think this is the whole theme of this year has just been like education. Like I've had so many people like so many opportunities to educate, like speaking at conferences and like gyrotonic.com. I just wrote a blog post for them, which will be coming out soon on accessibility. Um, so keep an eye out for that one. And then my students finishing up here soon and just gonna hopefully take a little bit of a breath. It's been a super busy year. So yeah, see what comes next and kind of like looking into my business and how I can optimize things there. So
Awesome. The article, when is it possibly coming out? Do
I'm
you
not
know?
sure yet. Probably my guess would be in the next couple months. But then yeah, and then going to Germany, this for the classifier training in October. So
Cool.
yeah.
Sweet. If people want to get a hold of you, is there a way that they can, whether that's email or social or even through your website? We can include it in kind of show notes as well. But
Yeah, my business name is Inside Edge Physical Therapy and Movement. InsideEdgeMovement.com. And you can find me on social media at Kate McD PT. And then my email, and everything's on my website, basically how to contact me directly. I'm just here in Park City, so
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kate. I appreciate you taking the time today to talk with me.
yeah, thank you for wanting to talk with me. Hopefully that wasn't too all over the place.